please put your, if you would please put your name and organization into the chat, that would be appreciated. As we proceed through the forum today, please place questions into the chat box and we'll review them during the Q&A at the end of the presentation, but you can enter those at any time. And thank you guys for entering your information. So as most of you are aware, I'll go pretty short here. EDH for 3D NHD is a cooperative agreement between NSGIC and USGS. The intent is to engage state and local governments and their private sector partners and to explore options for deriving high-resolution hydrographic data using 3D data, LIDAR for most of the US, but IFSAR for others. I wanted to quickly run through some of our tasks and projects and where we are on things. Our first task is to facilitate monthly information webinars, and thank you. You are here. Our second task is to establish elevation drive hydrography communities and online workspaces. We have two groups. The first is the EDH for 3D NHD interest group. That is a general interest group, folks that want to hear about EDH activities and project updates. I do say that we are going to convene that group at the NSGIC annual meeting as part of the Data for the Nation breakfast meeting. Unfortunately, because of the time, that will be we won't have, it will be in person only. There'll be no virtual option for the breakfast. We're also excited to announce, you should have seen today, an EDH for 3D NHD, the working group. Now, these are folks that will actually engage in project tasks. So again, there's the interest group and the working group. And we're going to have our kickoff meeting 2 days from now, Friday, July 3rd, with the USGS presentation about the 3DHP call to action. So I encourage you all to join us again on Friday. If you are not a member of the working group, you probably did not receive an invite, and so you can contact me if you need the call-in information. Our third activity is to inventory state and regional EDH experiences. Please, 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 we need your input. I'm going to add the link to the chat. Let me do that real fast. We'd love to hear from you. We do ask that you coordinate your contributions through your state rep. We don't want to get duplicates on things, so we're asking them to sort of vet them. Please, please join us. All right, the last three items are to derive critical factors from state and regional experiences. We are currently going through the EDH experience inventory I just showed you, as well as the forum presentations. And we are going to develop some draft factors, critical factors. Again, these are the experiences, needs, issues that state and regional governments are facing. And we're going to have a set of draft factors that will be vetted with that EDH working group. So again, if you have interest in participating, excuse me, please join the EDH working group and you'll have access to that. In response to those critical factors, we're going to use those critical factors to determine what the potential resources we could develop are, and we'll derive those from the critical factors. That's the next step. And we are currently working on the creation of a NSGIC EDH hub. Working with USGS, there's probably going to be, just a heads up, some name changes around here. EDH, 3D NHD, you'll learn with the call for action some of these programs. These programs are being streamlined, and so you might see a few changes in our names as well. So with that background, I'll go ahead and put in here today we're very happy to have the Indiana team with us. They'll be talking about the development and maintenance of their local resolution, national hydrography, and watershed boundary data. I'm going to introduce Megan Compton. She is the Indiana GIO as well as the NHD steward, and I'll let Megan introduce her co-presenters. And I will stop sharing and let Susan get the slides up there. How's that?
Thank you, Linda. Can you hear me okay?
Hear you great.
All right, thank you. All right, thanks, Susan, for bringing the slides up. And Linda, thank you for the introduction and the background of the program. Today, I have the opportunity to present with Susan Phelps from AECOM and Dave Knipe from the Indiana Department of Natural Resources. Susan, would you like to say a few words or introduce yourself?
Sure, yes. So I am Susan Phelps with AECOM. I served as the assistant project manager on the Indiana Local Resolution NHD project, and currently serving as a project manager for watershed boundary updates in the Lake Michigan area.
Thank you. And Dave, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Dave Knipe, Indiana Department of Natural Resources. I'm in what's the engineering section, engineering services center of the Division of Water, and mainly work with FEMA on as a cooperating technical partner in the floodplain management, floodplain mapping areas. But we also look and work very closely with both NHD and WBD.
Dave, thank you so much. Susan, do you want to go to the next slide?
Sure.
Okay, so just a quick overview of what we'll be covering today. I'll do a brief introduction of the program and then hand it off to Dave, who's going to go through the background of the local resolution NHD and the WBD. And then Susan's going to cover the Indiana local resolution NHD. We'll move into the NHD and WBD projects, the challenges and lessons learned, which I think is one of the best pieces of this entire presentation, all the things that we learned out of it. And then we'll talk a little bit about the maintenance efforts and what we're going to do moving forward. So I do have the pleasure of working with this group today. My responsibilities on this project are really in sort of just a leadership and oversight role. As the NHD data steward, I do not and have not had my hands in this project, as well as Dave and Susan and the rest of the team that you'll hear about throughout the course of this presentation. But I am very happy to be here today and excited to be presenting on this. So I have been with our Geographic Information Office for about 3 years. As you will hear in the timeline moving forward, this project was going on since far before I came onto the project. So, and learning through it, Susan, if you want to go to the next slide, we found out we have a lot of things that we learned about. We have a lot of processes that we'll be presenting to you today. And I am grateful to be able to, from the Geographic Information Office side, support this project in bringing the groups together that need to come to the table, work as just a conduit to bring the local, the state, the federal partners, the private partners together, as well as our nonprofit organizations that are involved in the project. Our office is responsible for integrating data, distributing data, and we do so as part of this project as well. We also help provide the licensing and the infrastructure that are in the background of the project. So sort of the behind the scenes piece. And the timeline for this started, like I said, the project started in 2008. Really, that's when we started in the NHD plan development between the Geographic Information Office and the Indiana Geographic Information Council, which is our state coordinating council. In 2009, the Geographic Information Office and IGIC, our council, did the RFP for the development of the NHD. And then we formalized that NHD and stewardship agreement with USGS. That was a really key piece. One of the things that I want to point out is that Indiana was the first state to begin and finish the statewide local resolution NHD. And we have a lot of lessons that we learned from that. So really we're in the forefront. So especially to the 6-acre detail. We have the lessons learned here that will be shared, and we've benefited from a really, really strong working relationship with USGS to make all of this happen. So with the 2009 to 2011, we moved into the existing high resolution NHD maintenance. And 2010, USGS was able to provide the 3-day NHD conflation and the QA/QC training. And then just in 2010, the GIO and IGIC were able to select AECOM as the local resolution NHD RFP awardee. So in the rest of this timeline here, what I want to point out is in 2011 to 2016, the statewide NHG local resolution data development happened. And then 2016 to current and into 2022, we'll have the NHG maintenance and statewide local resolution WBD planning and development. It's a very long-term ongoing effort. And then that ongoing NHG maintenance will continue from 2021 forward. You want to go to the next slide, Susan? What's important in the 2011 to 2016 piece is that this is when we started to do the NHG and WBD development. In the local NHG timeline, the 38 subbasins were gone through in this work level of detail that is listed out here. And just in this one subbasin, we have 93 days as part of this effort. And I want to point out that this is a pretty small subbasin that was, and multiple steps were involved in updating each of these, and it's critical to make it all very final. So each one of the, so you want to go over to the next slide. Each one of these had to go through its own timeline, and all of these were iterative. So each one of those processes, everybody had to go through the approval in a certain number of days, and all of those just added up. Even though we want to say this can all happen quickly, it does take quite a bit of time. The costs for the project were right around about $2.6 million so far. And that was on the local resolution NHG side of the project. The costs for those were broken down. A lot of the effort, a lot of the funding was from the Indiana Office of Community and Rural Affairs. About $2.5 million worth of funding came from our Office of OCRA, who managed the FEMA Disaster Relief Fund and grant. We have about $200,000 from IGIC, from our state council. And then the IDEM was able to provide us with about $12,000 worth of funding for the effort. So with a little bit of the background, a little bit of the timeline, I'm going to pass it off to Dave to dig further into the background of the local resolution NHG and WBD effort.
Thanks, Megan. So as Megan was saying, we started this effort back about 2008 in terms of thinking through what we wanted to do for the National Hydrography Data set and trying to update it. So this was based on best available digital orthophotography and elevation data. We had done a large LiDAR project, our initial one, from 2011 to 2013. So it kind of dovetailed with this project. And Susan will show when she gets into sort of the process, how we manage some of the previous elevation data that we had and the newer LiDAR, trying to utilize the best information through the timeline of the project. So, but we're trying to replace the old 24K quad map blue lines NHD data. So updating those from a scale to 1/24,000 to a scale of 1 to 2,400. And in most cases, it's 1 to 1,200 throughout the state. We did go up to a 6-acre drainage basin limit. We'll see the results of that decision here in the next few slides. But just redoing all the inconsistencies between the quads and some of the network topology, improving that, which is a real key feature of need to use this for hydrologic modeling and such. So next slide. And again, this just says the National Hydrography Data set, what we're dealing with. It is as it adopted officially as the framework data set for waters in Indiana by IGIC at one point, and then the Geographic Information Office. So I'm assuming that everyone here is pretty familiar with what NHD is. So next slide. And as we mentioned, one of the big features of our effort was our decision to go and take the streamlines up to a 6-acre catchment limit. We had done this based on a number of previous studies that we did a pretty thorough literature search through other other efforts that were out there in the 2008, 2009, 2010 timeline. We did a couple pilots ourselves with different limits and different standards for that catchment size. And in the end, we decided to go with a 6-acre catchment. We thought that gave us the best definition of the entire watershed and of the stream reaches. And that helps us with a number of different things. But going to the next slide, you can see the difference between a 6-acre catchment limit and a 20-acre catchment limit, and what's actually was in the 24K NHD originally. So the black line is the original NHD lines from prior to the project. So the red lines are the results out of the 20-acre limit, and then the blue lines are then the further lines to go up to the 6-acre catchment limit. So you can see even the 20-acre stream set gives us quite a increase in stream lines and actual line work in the data set. And then the 6-acre catchment just extends that even more. So so you can kind of see the scale of what we're dealing with here. Next slide. So a couple slides on how we use this data and sort of how we've been applying it, at least in my part of the world, to lead into Susan talking about a little bit more into process and procedure. So we took the final data set and used ArcHydro to derive a drainage area for each stream reach that ended up being over 0.15 square miles, which corresponded to a similar effort with stream stats with USGS. So that helps us. It's a great little data set we have to determine our jurisdiction for our regulatory programs. A lot of our limits for the Indiana Flood Control Act, for example, are keyed towards the drainage area of the stream. And we go through, we're in court going through arguing what drainage areas are. So having better information on that certainly helps us there. And then we use it for management and data sources for our risk map program, our FEMA floodplain mapping as part of the cooperating technical partner program. So it's invaluable in trying to define those floodplains a lot better than we have in the past. And it's a great framework to kind of hang all of that information on and manage it, because it's thousands and thousands of modeled streams and floodplains and such. So next slide. Then it's also key to use that 6-acre drainage limit when we go to define hydrology, and we use the Corps of Engineers HMS model to determine flow rates for our flood insurance studies work and our regulatory work for that matter. And that higher density stream network, we get all the parameters that go into that type of modeling are easier to define and more accurately defined, going through and using the higher resolution data that we have. So that's been a great boon for us in terms of trying to model streams and trying to determine hydrology and such. So next slide. And one thing that came out of our efforts is that with the new LiDAR, one of the things that we kind of tripped over as we were doing the project, we did it by Huck 8 basins. So, typically we think a Huck 8 basin is pretty solid in terms of there's no, flow goes one way or the other depending on where that line is drawn. But we definitely saw places, and not more than a handful, where we ran into interbasin transfer points between Huck 8 basins and even smaller basins than that. And so this, in terms of floodplain management and floodplain hydrology, this is one of those things we'd like to disappear, but it's an actual reality. It was kind of nice not having this complication in our lives when we were just using 7.5-minute quadrangles, but now that we see them, we have the data and we have the information that we need to try to adjust for them as best we can. So next slide. And then we also have been working with our partners at USGS, the Local Water Resource Center, on an update to StreamStats. If you're not familiar with StreamStats, that is USGS's program for determining hydrology and delineates basins, basin characteristics, stream flow statistics, looking at regression equations. It both looks at flood hydrology and also drought hydrology, so low flows and high flows. We have a number of different aspects of StreamStats that we've applied. We have from our fluvial erosion hazard program, we did a curve determining typical stream channel characteristics, area and width and such, and that's all built in StreamStats too. So having this this higher resolution information available to StreamStats is a real key to something the things we want to accomplish. Next slide. So we've been working with the folks here, and they've been over the last year or two processing a bunch of all of this data into the formats that are needed for StreamStats and QCing everything and all that. So it's been something that we've been looking to do for a while, and with some of the limitations we run into in terms of data set size and resolution and such, that also gets impacted with StreamStats. So we're working through those questions with our local water science center folks. So with that, I'm going to hand it off with this slide to Susan to talk a little bit more about our process in developing the NHD.
All right, thanks, Dave. So as I mentioned, I served as the assistant PM for our local resolution NHD project and basically the technical lead. So we'll start kind of with the local resolution NHD project details and go through that. And then I will skip over to the WBD updates and our efforts there. So this map depicts the base data sources that were utilized to improve the NHD for Indiana. So you can see here the reddish pink colors date back as far as 2005 for the imagery. And then for the terrain as well, these reddish pink areas show where the 2005 DEMs are the ISTAR data, which was actually derived from the imagery, terrain data that was derived from the imagery when that was collected. And so these were the data sources that we used for the local resolution NHD updates. And this is actually a metadata shapefile that we had created to track the base data sources that we used by HUC and by county. And this proved to be very useful for purposes of creating the metadata for the NHD. And just a quick stat on this, I think it ended up being about 22% of the state that was mapped based on this older ISTAR terrain versus this newer 2011 to 2013 LIDAR, some of those sources. All right, so I think David mentioned that the project started back in 2011 and it was completed in the spring of 2016. And we did actually have a bit of a pause within there, and I'll get into that in a bit when we talk about the challenges and lessons learned. So we completed the work by HUC 8 subbasins, as Dave mentioned, and we did have all of those HUC 8 basins. There's 38 in the state, so we had those prioritized at the start of the project, and that a lot of that was heavily relied on when the new LIDAR and imagery data sources were being flown between 2011 and 2013. But we also did base the priorities somewhat on the stakeholder needs, and we had some more challenging areas like karst to deal with, and then of course the Lake Michigan coastline and some of the larger urban areas like Indianapolis. So some of those came along a little bit further along in the project. And then, of course, we had to kind of prioritize work for the conflation efforts and edge matching. So trying to avoid working on adjacent areas at the same time for that purpose as well. And I will say too that the priorities changed quite a bit throughout the project. So we had to be quite flexible in terms of what came next. Okay, so the basic workflow for the project, Dave mentioned that they had done some pilot studies internally. We also did a pilot study as part of the project on our end. And our next step was really the base data collection and prep work that was done. So of course, we had the imagery and terrain sources that we've already talked about. We had the 24K in HD, which was needed for the conflation efforts. And we also had local data such as hydrography data and then stormwater data that was collected as part of the project too. And I mentioned, we started out with the ISTAR data and worked our way up to the newer LiDAR as soon as that data became available. So part of the prep work was really prepping those terrain sources, kind of prioritizing the areas that we had the newer data, making sure that we were using that. And we have a proprietary software program that we use for a lot of our floodplain mapping efforts and H&H efforts. So we actually use that to process the terrain and build the TINs and create the hydro-enforced DIMs and hillshades for the project. And I will say the hydro-enforced DIMs, I think at the time, so this was back in 2011, I think we used 50-foot hydro-enforced DIMs as the output for that. So these days we typically use about a 10-foot DIM for similar projects. So from those hydro-enforced DIMs, that we generated, we created the 6-acre basins and those 6-acre guide streams, I'll call them, that were used for reference purposes. We also generated flow accumulation grids and flow vectors as well that were provided. Okay, so this is just a quick example of what those outputs look like. And of course, at a 50-foot, coming from a 50-foot DIM, they're going to be a lot more granular. But so this is what the 6-acre catchments look like against the 6-acre streams. And then down here, we have the 6-acre catchments as compared to the local resolution output streams, or, the final product, I'll say. And then here, this is just an example showing how the 6-acre streams were used as a guide to how far up within the stream network to digitize the streams. And then the bottom left here is an image of the flow accumulation grids that were created. Okay, so we mentioned that we had done a pilot study as part of this project. So this is actually the results of that pilot study. This is the Upper Ill Subbasin. And you can see just how much more dense the stream networks are when looking at the 24K versus the local resolution in HD. And here's some quick stats on the number of features from the 24K versus this local resolution product. Okay, so after we had done that pilot project, which kind of helped confirm that 6-acre limit that David talked about earlier, we digitized the line work. So we had those base data sources that we had just generated. The reference files that we've generated, like the 6-acre streams and 6-acre catchments. And then, of course, the imagery, the DIMs and the hillshades were primary data sources as well. So we basically, there was a lot of manual effort still to, to get these local resolution streamlines in place and digitized. Some of the specs that we used, obviously the 6-acre drainage area for the upstream limit for the flow line features. For the area features, anything that was 40 feet wide or greater was collected as an area feature. And then any water bodies that were 1/4 acre or larger were captured as NHD area polygon features with an artificial path for the stream center line. And if anyone's wondering, 1/4 acre, that equates to about just under 11,000 square feet. So we did use the USGS's NHD schema and their feature types and feature codes as part of the digitization process. So we had that information already in the data set and ready to go for conflation purposes. So with this effort, we did want to maintain the 24K data as best as possible. So anywhere that the 24K NHD had something digitized as an area feature versus single line, we collected it the same way. We also included any lines and points from the 24K. So features such as stream gauges, dams, weirs, non-earthen shores, those types of things. If they were in the 24K and we could tell they still existed in the imagery and terrain sources, then we included those in the local res data as well. And then of course, as part of this effort, we did edge match to the existing 24K along all of the state borders and the sub-basin boundaries between HUC-8s. And as I mentioned, there were, we had these great reference data sources and everything, but there was still a good bit of manual work to confirm, the location of those local res hydro features. And so really the imagery, as great as it was having the LiDAR, the imagery, having that newer imagery too, was also really key to the project. Okay, so as I mentioned, we had some other data sources that were provided as part of the project. So this is just a couple of examples of those. The bottom left here shows the karst dye lines. And those were actually incorporated as underground conduit features in the NHD flow lines. And I think those were given F codes of definite. And I think there's also an indefinite or unknown F codes for the ones that aren't confirmed in there as well. And then the bottom right there shows an example of stormwater pipelines that were actually incorporated into the local resolution NHD. And I think this was really one of the first states to look at incorporating the stormwater data into the NHD system. Okay, so once we had all of the line work digitized, it had been through, QC by the work group and whatnot, we started really our pre-conflation processes within the NHD tools. So we used USGS's NHD geoconflation and NHD update tools to perform these tasks. So we use those to do all the pre-conflation checks. The topology checks were really just done in ArcGIS, but flow checks and some of the edge matching and those pre-conflation checks were done with the tools. And for the conflation itself, the 24K, any features that had a match in the 24K, the reach codes, the GNIS names, the GNIS IDs, all of and the 24K perennial, intermittent, ephemeral designations, all of those were conflated over to the new local resolution features. For any of the new features that did not have a match in the 24K, those were given new reach codes, and they were not given any type of perennial or intermittent or ephemeral designations. So there were a lot of stream, just plain stream, river, F codes in the data set at the end. And so USGS helped quite a bit with the checkout process and the check-in process, and helping us get everything loaded up into the national map on the back end. So that is it on the NHD project. So I'll get in really quickly to talk a bit about the WBD updates as well. So with all of these great new 6-acre local resolution NHD flow lines, as those were input into the official USGS NHD database, when we compared that to the existing HUC 12 and HUC 8 boundaries in the WBD, we saw a lot of conflicts there. And so that spurred an effort to start updating the WBD to the local resolution scale as well. And so that really started in about 2019. And you can see here on the left here, we have the imagery collection dates. So that's 2016 through 2019. And then the 3DHP LiDAR collection, which was done 2016 through 2018 for the purposes of what's been updated so far for the WBD efforts, that is. So there's actually even newer source data, if you notice, for the WBD updates. So there's a couple of ongoing efforts within the state as far as WBD updates. So this kind of focuses more on the updates for the Lake Michigan Coastal Program, which was the piece that we had been assisting with. And that covers 3 of the HUC 8 subbasins in the northwest part of Indiana here. So the dark maroon boundary is basically those HUC 8s that are impacted there. And so Indiana DNR had also been performing some WBD updates in some other basins as well. And their scope was pretty similar to ours, except they were not processing the newer LiDAR for those efforts. And they were actually working over here in the Kankakee Basin, which is adjacent to where we were working. So we did make sure that we were edge matching and, coordinating with them on making sure that data all lined up with what they had as well. So we worked with a large group of stakeholders for this effort. So some of those are listed here, but then there were also a lot of local stakeholders from the Lake Michigan coastal area that we worked with as part of this process as well. So the general workflow for this Lake Michigan area WBD updates, we went through a similar kind of process where we took the LiDAR source data. This time it was 2017 to 2018 data though. Processed that data, hydro enforced the DEMs, this time at a 10-foot scale. And we generated the initial HUC 12 basin boundaries from those hydro enforced stems. And so I will say there was still a lot of manual editing that was required on the back end. And that was just due to, local stakeholder feedback that we received, and also, conflicts and overlaps that we were seeing with the local resolution NHD. So there were still definitely some tweaks that had to be made to the data. So there were a series of 3 meetings that were held with the local stakeholder group. And so that was kind of to inform them about the project, to gather feedback from them, and have them review those final boundaries. And I will say that we did a lot of that on just the geometry of the WBD boundaries themselves. So try to finalize those as best as possible, the geometry of those features, before actually doing any updates with the official tools. And there was a data viewer that was created by Indiana DNR to assist with the stakeholder, gathering that stakeholder input. And that's actually going to be used throughout the state for the rest of the WBD updates as well. So after we had the geometry of the features really finalized and approved by the stakeholders, we checked out those WBD boundaries from USGS, made those updates to the HUC 12 boundaries up through the HUC 8 boundaries with the USGS's WBD update tool or edit tool. And of course, there's a series of built-in QC checks within that tool as well. So those were run and the errors were addressed. And so that has been sent to USGS. They've done a second QC on it now, and we're actually finalizing that data set as we speak. So this is just a quick example of one of the changes that was made. You can see up here the existing HUC 8 boundary is shown in this blue color. And then the yellow outline here is actually the new HUC 8 boundary. And in fact, this is along the Grand Calumet River, and this is Columbia Avenue here. So this became like the new HUC 8 divide right along in here. It previously was quite a bit further east. And this area in particular was key because this actually serves or will serve once this data is implemented into the national WBD. This will actually serve as a new divide between region 7 and region 4. So this is actually a HUC 2 level change that was implemented here. And so this is just an example of or a map of the changes that resulted. So you can see the existing HUC 12 boundaries are shown as the white outlines here, and then the updated boundaries are the ones that are in the colors here, and the new HUC 12s are shown as with the dark gray outlines here. So you can see, I think the area that we were just looking at was right along in here. So you can see there's a big shift there as to where the new boundaries are existing. And there's still actually a couple areas under review over here, and those are being coordinated amongst USGS and Indiana and some of the key contacts in Illinois for WBD. And so this is just a quick example of the USGS's WBD update tool. So the topology checks are run in here. This just shows a quick example of modifications that are made. And there's FGDC compliant metadata that's created by the tool. And once this current version that we're finalizing now is sent to USGS, once that's approved, it'll be processed and ingested into the official WBD and made available to the public via the national map. And with that, I will turn it back over to Dave to talk about challenges and lessons learned.
Thanks, Susan. So yeah, with a project this large, of course, there's a lot to learn and a lot to work through. If you go to the next slide, probably the biggest issue we ran into and continue to run into is just the large amount of data that we ended up generating for this. I know at any number of points we taxed the USGS server to the limit, and we like USGS things so much that we use them to an extreme degree sometimes. But yeah, both the amount of the data, the using the just to using the data once you download it. There's a lot of line work to kind of sort through. The 6-acre streams, we were also at the limit of some of USGS's tools for working with NHD with having all of that there. So definitely an issue. USGS, of course, is great to work through our issues. One big one that we ran into is that Susan touched on this a little bit, but we had to conflate everything as the F type of stream river all the way up into the watershed, because we didn't have a more appropriate F type. And as we figured this out, as we were developing the data, we petitioned USGS to add a new F type called drainage way. It's the name we ended up deciding on. That kind of defines those upper limit stream, up in the very upper part of the watershed. And so we think that's appropriate for that, as you're not calling that stream river or a major channel of any type. So calling that something different is probably think that's going to help us out quite a bit. Any of the issues that we run into with karsts, karsts is always a problem down in southern Indiana. The issue of using stormwater data and urban issues. Typically, when we do a watershed project or an NHD type update, we're looking at surface water kind of exclusively. That's the way it's been done, historically with USGS. However, having the data, and we actually went out to many of the municipalities and got their stormwater data line work. We wrestled with how appropriate that was to use, and in places we used it, in places we didn't. And I think that's a topic for more discussion down the line. And then how we deal with Lake Michigan, that kind of works into that same question, because our shoreline of Lake Michigan, at least towards the Lake County and Gary area, is pretty well developed. So you have both the urban and the lake shore issues running into that, and that also that area also is interesting for unknown flow direction. It's very flat up by the lake, so you have questions on which way the Grand Calumet and Little Calumet rivers flow one way or the other. With the high lake levels we've been seeing over the last few years, that's changed a lot of the direction of flow. And so in NHD, of course, you have one direction of flow. It's got to be one way or the other. And so when you have a situation like that, where it could be one way, you could be flowing one way or the other, you kind of have to make a decision and go with it. And that's, we wrestled with that with the NHD, and then we again wrestled with it again with doing the WBD update up there. We got consensus from all the stakeholders on where it should be. And that's probably a good thing, but there's always, I don't say we have 100% solution there. So that's just some of the challenges that we have in working with this data set and doing this. Or there are others, but I will turn it over to Megan to kind of close us out, to kind of explain where we're going from here.
Sure. Thanks, Dave. So one of the processes, on the process and the access side, folks at DNR went through a flattening process, which really helped to make the data more easily downloadable and usable within your maps. That said, you can get the data from multiple points. It's available through the NHD, WBD, from the national map. It's available on the Indiana map, and it's also available from DNR. Talk a minute about the workflow that is the maintenance part of the project. This is a a snapshot of the workflow that we currently have. And it is obviously still very complicated even today. Indiana is very fortunate to have two individuals at DNR, Bob Wilkinson and Joanna Wood, that are trained and extremely involved in this process. But it's not even their full-time job. So that has a significant impact. And the workflow that it makes this process very repeatable. That's what we like about this. It's because it's repeatable, it makes it a little bit more reliable, but even this needs to be simplified a little bit someday. And we'll keep this slide in here if you guys want to see the way that the workflow goes now. And I want to share too, if you want to go to the next slide, Susan. I mentioned Bob and Joanna, but this takes a village, and this is a list of maybe of most of the village. This is the folks who were involved in the process, involved in the project. In addition to the folks here and then and the folks at DNR, I want to mention the Waters Work Group. That group is critical in this partnership and in the communication, in the do's and don'ts, and the advisement of the project, both the next steps and how to improve the maintenance and things like that moving forward. Also, all of the national and state partners that are involved and were involved in the very beginning in the coding, the process, as Dave mentioned, the massive data sets that needed to be gone through in the beginning of the project, that was really critical to the success. And those folks continue to be involved in helping us as we move the project forward too. The feedback that we get through the USGS markup tool is critical. That takes USGS, it also takes the DNR and Indiana staff to manage that feedback in that tool. And we'll talk a minute about the GNIS names and the updates. You want to go to the next slide, Susan? So I'm going to step through a little bit of the NHD and WBD issues, but also really the next steps. And the first of which is to finish the statewide WBD updates. Susan, next slide, if you would. One of the key next steps is the current update. And the WBDs are currently being updated to the local resolution. This is the progress so far that's on this map, and DNR is putting processes in place now to do the rest of the updates, all of which is resource dependent. And next slide. We have, thankfully, as part of this effort, we have a lot of new streams that have been identified. Many of those streams do not have names, so we have to go out and get those names. So we have a campaign and a very nice story map and a location for folks to submit to rename or classify, or excuse me, name streams that have not been named before. We collect those names, and then the next phase is getting them on the map, which is a process with USGS. A whole nother process. Okay, thanks, Susan. The maintenance for the Indiana project is a little bit higher maybe than the more recent work, because when we started the project, the drainage way classification did not exist, like Dave mentioned. Part of the maintenance now requires the reclassification of those streams as headwater or overland flow for the existing streams. There's a lot of new flow lines now that need to be reviewed and reclassified for the F code and the F type classification. So some of those drainage ways are intermittent streams and ephemerals. It might be appropriate to do batch editing to these, but even if we do batch editing or mass editing, it's still HUC by HUC. So it's still very time consuming and takes quite a bit of effort from the staff. And then it requires a detailed review once those updates are made. So the next step for updating the NHD will be to focus here on the areas in red where the data was used from 2005. This is similar to what Susan said earlier. We utilize the 2005 imagery and terrain data, but that needs to be updated now to go back and utilize the newer data that we have available. And all of this is also in consideration with the impacted by the waters of the US. It's a little bit unknown at this point because of what many of you may know as the policies and politics that are involved in the waters of the US. Through 2 administrations, we've seen drastic changes for how we classify waters of the US. So where this policy lands does have an impact on tracking and mapping, as well as the regulatory impact as the state moves forward. And with that, I will thank you all for your time and close. We will take any questions. Our names and contact information are here on this slide, and I'll pass it over to Linda and Phil for any questions.
Thank you, Megan. I'm going to hand it to Phil too. I see some chats in the question. We don't have a lot of time, so maybe hit a couple of them, Phil.
Yep. Question from Kathy Power. I answered it in the chat. Fortunately, I know this project pretty well, so I could answer for you guys. What is the basis for identifying the data as 1 to 2400 scale or even 1 to 1200? Great question. The answer is that the horizontal resolution and accuracy it is based on the source imagery and LiDAR, and primarily the imagery. The 1 to 2400 scale NHD accuracy is based on us using a 1 foot pixel ortho base map. And the 1 to 1200 is based on a 6-inch. And even though the DEM was a 50-foot or a 10-foot DEM that was used to generate guidelines, the lines were really digitized, used as guides, and were digitized directly from the imagery. So that gives us the horizontal accuracy from the imagery and not from the DEM. Hopefully that answers the question. But that was a huge step in the process because people wanted good looking streams and ponds and lakes that match the imagery. Next question, can you expand on how you improve names in NHD? In our experience, NHD only allows names to be added where they exist in GNS. Did you add names to the GNS? And if so, is this an extensive process? Well, Megan already kind of answered it. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in. I'd be happy to cover it because this is a real can of worms.
Yeah, I'll just real quick, I'll jump in and say the only GNIS information that was added to the local resolution NHD was what was already in existence in the 24K. So from our end, we did not add any new GNIS information to the local res NHD. It was already whatever had already been approved and was in the 24K. And I'll let Phil take over from here.
Well, and the story map that Megan just showed is actually our tool to collect local input, to get new names for all these new streams that were never on the NHD to begin with. And there are a fair amount of locally named streams that exist that we hope to collect through that and then take through the process. But we recognize though the GNIS names process is very intense.
And also I'll add that Bob did help answer this question in the chat to talk, talk a little bit about the Indiana process that we have.
And let me just add that we will follow up with all of these questions. We'll send them over to the project team and give them an opportunity to elaborate. We've got some interview questions that we'll have them add as well. All of that information will be compiled along with recording of this presentation at the NSGIC learning link. So so we will get back to your questions. We are at 4 o'clock. I just wanted to thank the Indiana team. Great work, great insights, and we're learning it all together. So thank you guys for contributing. Our next, we do these webinars the third Wednesday of the month. The next webinar will be the State of Washington's NHD Strategic Plan for Elevation-Derived Hydrography, taking advantage of opportunities. They've done some innovations there with their outreach and stakeholder engagement, and that'll be Wednesday, August 18th. I didn't put it on the slide, but I should mention we will not hold a webinar in September due to the NSGIC annual meeting. With that, again, I thank our speakers. If you do have questions, I'll leave the chat open if you want to add them, and then we'll follow up with the team. So I'll leave that open for a little bit. But other than that, thank you all for joining us today. And those of you that are interested in the working group and learning more about the USGS call for action for the 3D hydrography program, please join us again on Friday. If you need contact information or information about joining that call, you can contact me directly. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Linda.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.